Before the first European ships ever touched the shores of North America, this land was already home to powerful nations, vast trade networks, and civilizations older than many countries in Europe. Cities rose and fell, empires expanded and collapsed, millions lived, governed, worshipped, and fought on this continent long before it was called America. So how did these Native American nations rise to such power? And how did so many of them lose their land, their independence, and their future? This is not just a story of conquest. It is a story of survival, resistance, and a past that still shapes the present. For thousands of years before European contact, North America was not an empty wilderness, but a densely populated and culturally complex world. Historians and archaeologists estimate that between 50 and 60 million people lived across the Americas by the late 15th century, with millions north of Mexico alone. These societies adapted to vastly different environments, from the frozen Arctic to the deserts of the Southwest, from the forests of the East to the plains and river valleys of the interior. In the Mississippi River Basin, the ancestors of the Mississippian cultures built large urban centers like Cahokia, near modern-day St. Louis. At its height, around the year 1100, Cahokia rivaled European cities in size, with massive earthen mounds, complex political organization, and long-distance trade networks. In the Southwest, the Ancestral Pueblo peoples constructed multi-story stone cities, such as Chaco Canyon and Mesa Verde, connected by engineered roads and supported by advanced knowledge of agriculture and astronomy. Along the Pacific Northwest, tribes like the Haida and Tlingit built wealthy societies based on fishing, trade, and craftsmanship, while in the eastern woodlands, nations such as the Iroquois Confederacy developed sophisticated political systems that balanced power among multiple tribes. These nations were not static or isolated. They traded goods, ideas, and technologies over vast distances. They fought wars, formed alliances, and adapted to changing climates and resources. Political authority varied widely, from centralized leadership to councils and confederacies. Spiritual beliefs were deeply tied to the land, shaping how communities understood their place in the world. This story matters because the rise and fall of Native American nations did not begin with Europeans, nor did it end with conquest. Indigenous societies were dynamic, resilient, and influential. Understanding their histories challenges the myth that American history began in 1492 and reveals a continent shaped by native nations long before the United States existed. The arrival of Europeans in the late 15th and early 16th centuries transformed Native American history more rapidly and violently than any previous change. When Spanish, French, Dutch, and later English explorers arrived, they entered a world already shaped by native power. Early encounters were not immediately defined by conquest. In many regions, Europeans depended on native nations for survival, trade, and guidance. Alliances formed based on mutual interest, especially in the fur trade and regional rivalries. But the balance of power soon shifted, largely because of disease. Smallpox, measles, and influenza spread faster than any army, killing entire communities that had no immunity. Historians estimate that in some areas, native populations declined by more than 70% within a century of contact. This demographic collapse destabilized societies, weakened resistance, and reshaped political landscapes long before large-scale colonization took place. Despite this devastation, many native nations adapted and resisted. In the Southeast, powerful societies such as the Cherokee, Creek, Choctaw, Chickasaw, and Seminole reorganized politically and economically. Some adopted European-style farming, literacy, and written constitutions in an effort to protect their sovereignty. In the Northeast, the Iroquois Confederacy skillfully played European powers against one another, maintaining influence for generations through diplomacy and warfare. As European colonies expanded, conflicts intensified. Wars such as King Philip's War in the 1670s devastated native communities in New England, while colonial expansion pushed steadily westward. Treaties were signed and broken repeatedly, often under coercion or false promises. By the late 18th century, the formation of the United States marked a new phase. The young republic viewed native nations not as equals, but as obstacles to expansion. In the 19th century, U.S. policy turned increasingly aggressive. Forced removal became federal law under the Indian Removal Act of 1830. Thousands were driven from their ancestral lands in events like the Trail of Tears, where Cherokee, Creek, Choctaw, Chickasaw, and Seminole peoples suffered immense loss and death. On the Great Plains and in the West, military conflict followed, as nations such as the Lakota, Cheyenne, Apache, and Comanche resisted encroachment. The rise of the United States brought the systematic dismantling of native independence. Reservations, broken treaties, and military defeat marked the collapse of many native nations as sovereign powers, even as indigenous peoples continued to endure and resist in new ways. The decisive turning point in Native American nations came in the late 19th century, when resistance met the full force of an industrializing United States. By this time, westward expansion was no longer driven only by settlers and soldiers, but by railroads, mining corporations, and federal policy. The survival of native sovereignty now stood against the momentum of an entire nation. One of the most symbolic moments occurred on the Great Plains. For decades, Plains nations such as the Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho had defended their homelands through warfare and diplomacy. Victories like the Battle of the Little Bighorn in 1876, where Lakota and Cheyenne forces defeated General Custer, briefly proved that native resistance could still succeed, but the response was overwhelming. The U.S. Army intensified its campaigns, destroying villages, seizing horses, and targeting food sources, especially the buffalo. The near extermination of the buffalo was not accidental. It was a strategy designed to break plains societies by destroying the foundation of their way of life. As military defeat became unavoidable, federal policy shifted from open warfare to forced assimilation. Native children were removed from their families and sent to boarding schools, where they were punished for speaking their languages or practicing their cultures. The goal was explicit: to erase indigenous identity. The Dawes Act of 1887 divided tribal lands into individual allotments, breaking communal ownership and opening millions of acres to white settlement. This policy alone resulted in the loss of roughly 2/3 of native-held land within a generation. The symbolic end of armed resistance came in 1890 at Wounded Knee. There, U.S. troops killed more than 200 Lakota men, women, and children. What followed was not a battle, but a massacre. Wounded Knee marked the collapse of large-scale native military resistance and the beginning of a new era defined by confinement, poverty, and cultural suppression. Yet even in defeat, native nations did not disappear. Survival itself became a form of resistance. Languages were preserved in secret. Traditions endured in families and ceremonies. The fall of Native American nations as independent powers was not the end of Native history, but a transformation forced by violence, loss, and resilience beyond measure. The story of the rise and fall of Native American nations is not a closed chapter in the past. It is a living history that continues into the present. After the violence and dispossession of the 19th century, Native communities faced new challenges in the 20th. Federal policies shifted repeatedly, from forced assimilation to limited recognition of tribal self-government. The Indian Reorganization Act of 1934 restored some degree of sovereignty, but it could not undo generations of loss. Despite centuries of upheaval, Native nations endured. Today, more than 500 federally recognized tribes exist in the United States, each with its own government, laws, and cultural traditions. Native activism in the 20th century, including movements for civil rights, land claims, and cultural preservation, forced the country to confront its history. Court cases, treaty rights, and a renewed emphasis on tribal sovereignty continued to shape the relationship between Native nations and the federal government. The legacy of these nations is everywhere. Democratic ideas such as federalism and representative councils were influenced by indigenous political systems. Agriculture, medicine, and environmental knowledge developed by Native peoples remain essential. At the same time, the consequences of colonization, including poverty, health disparities, and land loss, remain ongoing realities. Understanding this history matters because it challenges the idea that Native nations simply vanished. They were pushed, broken, and transformed, but they survived. Their resilience reshaped North America just as surely as conquest did. The rise and fall of Native American nations is ultimately a story of power, injustice, and endurance, one that continues to define the modern world. How do you think understanding Native American history changes the way we see American history as a whole? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this documentary meaningful, consider liking the video and subscribing for more in-depth stories about the people and events that shaped our world.